So welcome again to the parenting series, Coping Parents, Cooperative Kids. I'm Alex Mabe. I'm a clinical psychologist and professor here at the Department of Psychiatry and Health Behavior, the Georgia Health Sciences University. Today we're going to be talking about the importance of the parent-child relationship and how to build that to facilitate your efforts to help your child with whatever needs they might have. Let me illustrate the importance of the parent-child relationship in this way. I want you to imagine a bank account, and what makes for a healthy bank account? Well, you got to have deposits, and lots of them. The more deposits you put in, the healthier your bank account is. Well, the same is true in the parent-child relationship. The more deposits you put into that relationship, the more effective, the more strong that relationship is going to be. What are things that parents can do to put those deposits in? We're going to talk about some key things, but there are lots of things that parents can do. They can praise their children, they can give them things, they provide transportation for them, they go to work and bring home the funds needed for housing and all kinds of needs the child might have. Spending special time, giving hugs and kisses, all of those things are potentially deposits that a parent can make in the relationship. Now, why do we put money in the bank? What's the purpose of that? Well, at some point we're going to have to withdraw that money out of the bank. And that's a natural part of the financing of a family. Well, the same is true in relationships. There are going to be natural times when you're going to make withdrawals in the relationship. For example, you may make the child do something they don't want to do, or you may refuse to let them do something they want to do. You may make them do their chores. You may criticize them when they've done something wrong. There are lots of things that are just naturally going to come about in a relationship that does, in fact, take some emotional money out of the bank. There's nothing wrong with that. Quite frankly, if I go home this evening and I call my wife and she says, by the way, on the way home, could you pick up some milk? It's not a big deal, but it is a withdrawal. It takes a little extra time and attention on my part. So it's natural and normal for families to have withdrawals. The only problem comes when there are more withdrawals than there are deposits. So let me use this example. Let's just say that you go outside and get in your car to leave, and lo and behold, you have a flat tire. Well, how big a deal is that? Well, it depends. If you have a tire that's damaged, that's going to have to be replaced, and all you have is $50 in your bank account, it's a huge deal. You've got a big problem. On the other hand, if you have $5,000 in your bank account, it's still a hassle. Nobody likes to get a flat tire, but you have the funds. You can handle the stress of that flat tire. You see the difference? It's not a matter of what happens to us, it's how much do we have built up in the bank account that helps us to withstand the stresses that we live with on a day-to-day basis. Well, what about in the child example? So let's say you get a call from your child's school teacher and says, I just want you to know that your child was being disrespectful to the teacher today and is going to be given 1 to 2 days of in-school suspension. How big a deal is that? Well, it depends. If it's April and this is the first time you've had a call from school, then yes, it's stressful. There's nothing pleasant about that, but it's not a huge deal. Why? Because your child's been doing pretty well and has been putting a lot of deposits in the bank over the course of the school year. On the other hand, if it's like October and this is the 5th time you've received a call, then the emotional bank account is pretty low and there's a lot of stress that goes in with that event. So it's not so much the events that happen to us, it's how strong is our relationship to withstand the stresses of these events. In my experience, I've found that families who are going through difficult times with their children, often, not always, but often the emotional bank account is very low. And therefore, it's really hard to do the difficult things that you have to do as a parent when your emotional sense of the relationship is so low. And the same is true for the children. So my job today is to help you learn how to build up this emotional bank account, to build up this parent-child relationship in a way that really helps you and your child to have the strength, to have the endurance to deal with the hard problems in life. So let's start with withdrawals. What are some of the major withdrawals that you really have to pay attention to because they can do a lot of damage to the relationship? Well, I'm going to start with some relationship research that looks at marital relationships and some of the major withdrawals that can occur in marriage. And I think as you hear this list, you're going to see how that it most definitely applies to the parent-child relationship as well. So let's look on the board here and write down a few of these key words. So one of the major withdrawals is escalation. And that's when the parent and the child begin to have a conflict with one another, and it just escalates. It's just like you get louder and you throw in everything you can think of that bothers you about that person, and you start out as a small argument, but then it becomes a really big argument, and that escalation can do a lot of damage. The second is called invalidation. Invalidation is when you communicate to the person that I don't really care what you think, that what you feel or what you think about a situation really doesn't matter to me. Now sometimes that can be a subtle thing, so that you kind of act like you're not interested in what the person says, or you don't agree with anything they say about it, or sometimes it's really directed in your face. It's like, I don't care about you as a person, I don't want to be around you, and so that kind of direct invalidation can be very destructive. The third withdrawal in marital relationships is called withdrawal. And withdrawal is when you begin to pull back emotionally. You stop talking to each other, you stop communicating with one another. And so, and this is kind of the way that we often fight in families. So we, say, you go to our spouse and say, is anything wrong? And the spouse says, no. And you can tell by the expression on their face that there is definitely something wrong, but they're not willing to talk to you about it. They're withdrawing from you. Again, withdrawal can be a subtle thing, like stopping talking to each other or being unwilling to communicate around the issue, or it can be much more direct. I'm leaving you, this is it, we're going to get a divorce, a much more severe sense of withdrawal. The last one on the marital research is called negative interpretations. And that's when we began to interpret every little thing that the child does, or the parent, or in the case of marital relationship, that the spouse does. Every little thing we interpret in a negative way. So I ask you, so the husband brings home a dozen red roses, and it's not Valentine's Day. How is the wife going to respond to that? Excited, happy, or what have you done? Why are you giving me flowers? And again, that's that negative interpretation. It's a sense that, that any little thing that's done is always going to be interpreted in a negative way. Well, you can imagine how discouraging that is. If you're really trying hard to be positive and encouraging and doing something nice, and the other person's interpreting it in a negative way, you just feel like you want to just give up. And children experience that with parents. And so when we interpret every little thing they do in a negative way, they begin to feel discouraged. Now, this is from the marital research. And notice that each one of those could definitely apply to the parent-child relationship. Now, why would I use the marital research? Because it has a very important point. First of all, these 4 forms of withdrawal are very important and are very predictive of how satisfied people are in their marriages, and also very predictive of divorce. And so these are incredibly important forms of withdrawal. Now, the other main point, though, is that for any one of these forms of withdrawal, it takes 20 to 25 deposits to make up for one of these very negative events. So I kind of think of these as like a nuclear explosion going off in the relationship. And once it happens, it does a lot of damage and takes a long, long time to clean up the mess. So you can get your relationship in real trouble by engaging in these kinds of withdrawals. Well, let me now turn my attention to some of the research looking at the parent-child relationship and some of the complaints that children have about parents and things that parents do that create this sense of withdrawal. So the first one on my list here is always bringing up the past. Now, I realize that parents use the past to help children learn from their mistakes. So if a child engages in some inappropriate behavior with other kids, for example, might be too aggressive or impulsive, it would be certainly acceptable and actually useful to parents to say, now remember, last time you were at the birthday party, you were a little bit too aggressive and you need to watch that. That's not the problem. The problem is when the parent keeps bringing up the past, keeps making the child feel bad about something they did in the past, and they will never let it go. Very discouraging for the child, really causes problems. The second one is attacking the person. Now, it's certainly understandable. The children are going to make mistakes. They will do bad things. But the problem is when parents start using words against the person. You're stupid. You're a liar. And so on. And there are lots of really ugly words that parents will use to call out their child's misbehavior. Now, there's nothing wrong with saying that a behavior is a problem, but when you just start describing the person as the problem, then you run into serious trouble. Now, ask yourself this question. Have you ever lied? Have you ever told something that really wasn't true? And I think if we're honest with ourselves, all of us have done that. But do we think of ourselves as a liar? Is that who we think of ourselves as? That's who I am as a person? And so when we use words like you're a liar or whatever negative words we might use about the child, what we're really saying is that's who you are as a person. Well, that does a lot of damage to the parent-child relationship. The third one, I call it compliment sandwiches. Some of us are rather perfectionistic, and when we criticize our child, and too often it really becomes a major stress for children. So you're the parents who go and look at the report card and said, well, you did nice and good report card, but, and you point out some negative. Or you go to the room where they cleaned it up and you said, nice job cleaning up your room, but. Now, I don't have any trouble with adding some extra kind of criticism along with compliment if you don't do it too much. But what if you do it almost every time? Almost every time you say something positive about the child, you've always got to add a negative. You never can just give them a pure compliment. So what does the child begin to understand about compliments? Well, they're just preludes for what you really want to say, which is some critical negative thing. So compliment sandwiches are very discouraging for children when you're always adding that criticism, always adding that but at the end of the compliment. That creates stress for the kids. The fourth one is the attitude or the conveying with your behavior that you must first be good in order for me to love you. Now, we would never say that. We would never say, I will not love you unless you do exactly what I want. And yet our demeanor, our attitude, our mood seems to convey a different message. If we're always kind of grumpy and irritable and always seem like we're not pleased with what the child is doing, then the child begins to believe that you don't really love them because you're always mad at me, you're always upset with me. And this really, again, is a very discouraging experience for children. The last on the child and adolescent list is no opportunity to regain trust. Now, this is a very common complaint that teenagers have. It just seems like once they've messed up and you've said those famous words, I just can't trust you, then the teenager begins to believe there's never going to be a better time. They're never going to be able to recover from this bad event. Now, I understand when parents say, I don't trust you, what they're trying to say, that they have lost trust because of the child's significant problem behavior. But I want you to notice that over time that becomes such a discouraging factor for the child or the teenager that they stop trying. So I want to give you an example of how to explain to the child or the teenager how to think about trust in a different way. Usually when we say, I don't trust you, we mean something different than what they're hearing. Let me use this example. Let's say that you're a young 20-year-old and you just went to the air show and you saw the Blue Angels. And you're pretty excited and you're pretty pumped up and you'd like to be a jet pilot. So you go to the local Navy recruiter's office and you say to the recruiter that you want to be a pilot. And by the way, the recruiter says, there's an F-18 parked out back. Would you like to take it for a spin? Well, that would be ridiculous. A 20-year-old can't fly a F-18, $50 million airplane. If they did happen to start it up, what would happen? Well, it'd be a tragedy. It would be a disaster. Within seconds, they would destroy this plane. They would kill themselves. If anybody happened to be in their pathway, they would be killed as well. Now, the recruiter would never do that. Why? Because that 20-year-old is a morally bad person? Has nothing to do with whether or not you're a good person or not. Has everything to do with competence, skill, training. 20-year-old hasn't had the training. Well, in order to be able to fly an F-18, you have to go to flight school. And the first thing you fly is not a plane, you fly a simulator. And once you learn how to fly a simulator, then you're not going to fly a plane that's a jet, you're going to fly a propeller plane. And you won't be by yourself. You'll have a co-pilot. And you'll learn how to fly a small engine plane with a co-pilot with lots of flight time, lots of practice. And only when you've mastered that will you be able to move up to the next level. What happens if you hit the landing too hard and you crack up the landing gear? Do they throw you out of school? No. They back you up in the training, put you back on the simulator perhaps, lots more training until you're ready to move on to the next step. And so gradually with this flight training, with this experience with a co-pilot, and lots of what's called flight time, you will eventually become a jet pilot. It takes about 2.5 years, by the way, which is remarkably fast, but keep in mind they eat, sleep, and drink flight school during this period. So what does that have to do with a teenager? Because, quite frankly, the average teenager wants you to give them the keys to their plane, like around 13 or 14. And of course, we know that they're not ready for that. That if we actually gave them the keys to their life, it would be a disaster. They would destroy their life within seconds, and they would destroy anyone in their pathway. And so we don't give them the keys. Now, so when we say, no, I'm not ready for you to do this because I don't trust you, what the average teenager hears from that is, you think I'm a morally bad person. That's not what we're saying at all. What we really are saying is, no, I don't believe you've had the training. I don't think you've had the experiences needed to be able to handle the situation. No, you're not ready to go out with your friends till 2 o'clock in the morning. You know, I'm not saying you're a bad person. I'm just saying you haven't had the experience, the know-how to handle that situation. I think that's a helpful way to explain to them. That, by the way, that doesn't mean they're not going to still like you for putting restrictions on them and not giving them the keys to their life, but it certainly helps them to put in the context. All right, so let's just kind of reflect for a moment on these withdrawals. I've given, this is the 5 listings for the children and teenagers to give, but I've also, remember I said escalation in the marital relationship. I've talked about the invalidation that you can exhibit, the emotional withdrawal from the other person, and the negative interpretations. All of these things can do a lot of damage and really make it difficult for you to build a relationship with your child so they can be effective. So I just ask that you reflect on these, to ask yourself if which of these might cause you more problems, and to be mindful that as you attempt to help your child with their problems, whether they're behavioral or mood problems, that you're going to have to work on your withdrawals. You're going to have to be careful how you respond in order to give them encouragement and give them support. Well, let's turn our attention now to the deposits. What are the key things that we can do to help our children? So let me start with a question, which is, what is the most important thing that we give our children? What is it that we can give them that really makes the biggest difference in their life? Now, when I ask that question to parents, a lot of times they will say things like love, and which is really valuable, and or encouragement, or all kinds of positive things that are described. But I would suggest to you that the most important thing that parents give is time. Giving them our time is the most important thing that a parent can give. Because you know, you can tell a child that you love them, you can give them things and provide all kinds of things, but if you're not willing to give them your time, they don't really trust that you love them. Now, what is it about Americans that we don't give our kids time? We just don't. I mean, the research suggests that on average, that a parent only gives their child their undivided attention. No distractions, no other people, just one parent, one child, only about 5 minutes per day. That's not nearly enough time. We need to really devote our attention to giving our children time and to do that effectively. So I would suggest for children under age of 10 or under that you need to double that to try to develop a discipline of spending at least 10 minutes of quality time with your child. Now, what doesn't count in that quality time? Well, watching TV together doesn't count. Why? Because you're watching TV. You're not giving your direct attention to the child. Taking them to movies or taking them to ball games, those are all fun things and great activities, but you're not giving your child their undivided attention. No, I mean one parent, one child, undivided attention. Even having family meals, which is a great thing to do, by the way. The research shows that when families regularly sit down to a meal together and talk and spend some time, that they have less problems with substance abuse difficulties in their kids. Great thing to do, should do it, but that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking one parent, one child on a regular basis. Now, how do you spend the time in this 10 minutes? What should you be doing? So let me go over some suggestions on how to have really quality time with your child. I'm going to borrow from a form of treatment called parent-child interaction therapy, which is out of University of Florida. Sheila Iberg has been studying this kind of therapeutic play with children, and she's come up with what she calls the skills that help parents and children really effectively improve the quality of their relationship. And so as we look at this list, we want to kind of think about what is it that we do that will encourage the child to be more engaged with us and develop a better parent-child relationship. Well, first is praise. And I'm going to come back to that a little bit later on. But praise is a very important component. There's two kinds of praises. There's unlabeled and there's labeled. Now, unlabeled would be saying things like, you're a good kid, or I really enjoy being around you. And those are nice things to say, but what the research says is that the label praise that probably makes the most difference. Being very specific. Oh, I liked that drawing, or I like the way you handled yourself this morning with your brother. It's those specific actions the child does and our commenting on that probably makes the most difference. The next thing we can do is to reflect. So when the child is talking, engaging in some play during this 10 minutes time, if we can just simply reflect on what they're saying. So if the child says something like, well, I really love my dolls, you as the parent would say, so you really like to play with your dolls. Now, what's the point of that? Why is that valuable? Because when you do that, it gives them a sense that you are paying attention, that you're noticing the little things that you do, and you're able to reflect on those things, and that communicates that message. I'm really with you. I'm really getting this. Oops. The third on this list of these parent-child interaction skills is to imitate. So if the child is playing with dolls, guess what? You play with dolls. Now don't play with their dolls, don't interfere with their play, but just play beside them and just kind of participate, imitate, assuming it's a reasonable thing to do. So if they're playing with blocks, you get some blocks and you play with blocks. If they're drawing, then you draw. In other words, you kind of just parallel play with them to just spend that 10 minutes of time with them. All right, the next thing is to describe. Some children are not very talkative. They're just going to sit there quietly and play. And you will be kind of like the sportscaster who does the play-by-play. You're going to describe what you see. So, oh, I see you're taking that car and you're driving it right up to the house there. You're just describing what they're doing. Again, what's the message? I'm really paying attention to you. And that's a very appealing thing that parents can do that really engages the child and gets them excited about being with you. The last one on the list is enthusiasm. When we're playing with a child and when they do positive things, we want to say it, we want to engage with them in an enthusiastic way. You don't want to come home and spend that quality time with a child and you're sitting there going, oh, that's a nice drawing. No, you want to have some enthusiasm. Hey, that's beautiful. I love the colors there. You want to put some energy in it. I realize you're tired. You've had a long day. But this 10-minute quality time can make such a big difference in the quality of your relationship with your child. So practice these pride skills, they're called. You can see that each letter kind of represents the word that forms the word pride. And if you will do this on about 10 minutes a day, I think you'll start seeing a major difference in your child. Now, during this special 10 minutes of interaction with a child, there are 3 things I want you to avoid. So one is, don't give them a bunch of commands. Commands are going to create a kind of negative sense that you're bossing them around, and there's perfectly okay and natural to give commands at other times. So I'm not saying don't ever give commands, of course. I'm just saying during this special therapeutic play, just try to avoid trying to teach them things. You're not there to teach them anything. You're just there to let them know that you love them and you want to spend time with them. You'd like to get to know them better. Avoid the commands. You definitely want to avoid criticism. You don't want to say, well, that drawing doesn't look like a horse, or you're not building the blocks right. That kind of criticism, of course, is very discouraging for the child and does not create the kind of atmosphere that you want. And the last thing, the one I have, quite frankly, the most difficulty with, is don't ask a bunch of questions. You ever been working on a project at home and your loved one comes and keeps asking you a bunch of questions about it, and how frustrating that is to have someone constantly question you about things? Well, don't do that to the child either, because it is discouraging and they don't really like it. So if you will practice these pride skills, I believe you will begin to see that the child really starts perking up in their relationship with you. They'll want to spend more time with you, and they will start actually wanting to mind you better and be more cooperative with you around the home. Now, what about the older child? What about the 11-year-old, middle school child, high school child? Do they want to spend 10 minutes of quality time with mom or dad? Well, usually not. Some do, but usually not. And so it doesn't really work for the older kids, this kind of special 10-minute time. Instead, for the older kids, I suggest that you develop a outing about 45 minutes to an hour each week. So not every day for sure. Not really talking about any elaborate planning, but just kind of a 45-minute or an hour, quote, date with your child. Again, a lot of the same principles will be followed. You will use your quality time skills as I've described here. You're not there to talk about problems unless they want to. You're just there to spend time with them, to get to know them and enjoy their company. One of the things I used to do with my own children as they were growing up is when they were teenagers, I would take them out for breakfast. I would do this separately, each child. And I did that for 2 reasons. One is, when you're eating, you don't have to talk if you don't feel like talking. So you can just sit there and eat and just enjoy each other's company as you're getting ready for the day. The other reason I would take them out to breakfast is because, well, quite frankly, I'm cheap. And it doesn't cost very much to take a kid to breakfast, especially since for a teenager, breakfast is what, around 10 o'clock? And I've already eaten breakfast. And so I'll take them to Hardee's, get a biscuit or some other place and just, not have to spend a lot of money, but have good quality time with my child. Some place away from home often is beneficial as opposed to being in the home, especially if the home has been a place of conflict. So anytime you can kind of get away out into neutral territory, it makes it a little bit easier. Some rules about these outings. Don't go just only when you feel like it. Quite frankly, if you've had a lot of problems or conflict with your child, you're not going to feel like it. And quite frankly, they're not going to feel like it either. Make it a discipline. Kind of explain to them that, they're growing up. There's not many years left that they're going to be in the household. And you'd like to get to know them a little bit better. So don't wait until you feel like it, till the Spirit moves you. Go to neutral territory, as I said. Take turns deciding where you might go. You want to go to places that are relatively free of distractions. You wouldn't take them to the local arcade, for example. But just sometimes taking a walk or a bike ride, or like I said, I would take my kids to breakfast. Something simple that doesn't take a lot of time or cost a lot of money. You want to have a backup plan. If there's a problem and you can't make this outing that you planned, you don't want to be discouraging to them. Kind of picture this in your mind. You've had a lot of conflict with your teenager. You've said, I want to spend some quality time, and Saturday morning I'm going to take you out to breakfast. But then Saturday morning your boss calls and says, I need you at work. Can you imagine waking up that teenager and say, by the way, and I told you I was going to take you out to breakfast, but I can't do it today? What's that teenager going to be thinking? Well, they're going to be thinking, there he goes again. He's always making promises, never follows through. His work is more important than I am. Very discouraging. So don't get yourself caught in that predicament. Here's what you do. You say, I'd like to spend some time with you, get to know you a little better. I'm going to take you out to breakfast Saturday morning, but if anything should happen to come up, I'll make sure that we plan something Sunday afternoon. So now, when Saturday comes along and you've got to go to work, you can tell the teenager, now, I told you Saturday, but remember I said if something bad happened or it came up, that we would move it to Sunday afternoon. Always have a backup plan. And the last rule I like to make about these outings is don't make it a reward for good behavior. You're not doing this as a reward for good behavior. You're doing this because you're trying to build up this parent-child relationship so that they can be strong in the relationship with you and be able to withstand stresses and problems in their life. So, get this picture. It's Friday afternoon. They come home. They've got a big red slip from the school saying they cursed out the teacher. They got a 1 day of out-of-school suspension. Do you go with them to breakfast Saturday morning? Well, the answer is yes, you do. Why? Because the outing is not a reward for good behavior. The outing is about you building up your relationship. Now, it's perfectly okay, by the way, when you come home from the outing to go ahead and punish them, give them big chores or whatever you need to do to get the message across that, cursing out the teacher is not okay. Just don't mess with the outing. So, the first major deposit that you can put in the parent-child relationship is to put in time. Lewis Laws tells his story how he and his wife went to Sing Sing prison back in the early part of the 20th century, and transformed the inhumane conditions at Sing Sing prison. And he would always credit his wife, Catherine, for the transformation that occurred. In his first weeks as the warden of that prison, she came to a basketball game in the prison and brought her kids. They'd never seen kids, much less a woman, come and visit the men in Sing Sing prison. But there she was. And she began to make a habit of visiting the inmates there, getting to know them, spending time with them. One gentleman was deaf. She taught herself sign language so that she could communicate with him. One gentleman was blind. She taught herself Braille so she could teach him how to read. Quality time built up over time. Sadly, in the 5th year of his service to Sing Sing, she was killed in an automobile accident, a very tragic event. The next day, when the assistant warden told them the sad news about Catherine, you could see the men were quite distraught and really were just kind of agitated about this situation. You see, a mile from the prison was the warden's home, and the men wanted to pay their respects. So probably unheard of in the American penitentiary system, never happened before, probably will never happen again. The assistant warden opened the gates of Sing Sing prison and allowed those men to walk 1 mile to Catherine's home to pay their respects. And you know what? Every single one of them came back. Do you see what I'm talking about? This power of the relationship, giving time, and what that can do. The last deposit I want to speak about is praise. Praising your children is a very, very valuable tool. Now, I talked about using praise in this special 10-minute time, or perhaps if you're doing it with a teenager, this 1-hour outing. But I want to talk about praise in a broader sense. If you look at problem children, you will often see that the kinds of interactions that the parent-child has with one another is often negative. So the parent's spending a lot of time nagging, scolding, threatening, punishing, criticizing the child. And so that the parent's attention is mostly focused on the negative. And that can be very discouraging in the parent-child relationship. But what happens when you begin to praise them for all the little things that they do, what happens is that whole relationship negativity begins to soften. And they begin to realize that you do care about them and that you are noticing the little things that you can do. So I have just 3 very easy to follow rules about praise. I want you to work on praise so that you focus on these 3 components. So the first rule about effective praise is be specific. The more specific you are, the more clear you are about what they are doing well, the better your results are going to be. And so when the child is getting ready for school and they have their book bag ready to go, I realize that's not a big deal. It's kind of expected of the child, but just commenting on that and saying, wow, I appreciate you having all of your materials ready before we leave. I know it's a small thing, but that is very encouraging to the child. When they get a good grade, when they try hard, even if they try hard and don't get a good grade, just the effort alone, giving them a specific comment like, you know, I realize that your grade didn't come out so great, but I know that you studied this and I really appreciate how hard you worked last night on your spelling test or whatever they worked on. Be specific. Be specific. The more specific that you can be, the better. Be enthusiastic. A lot of children complain. Their parents never think I ever do anything right. And even when they give compliments, it's kind of negative and not really much energy put into it. So when you praise them, you know, I realize that some of us by nature are kind of subdued and we don't give a lot of praise and we don't act very enthusiastic about much of anything. But the more we can do enthusiastic praising, the more they're going to get it. So kind of bump up your volume a little bit and get your energy up a bit, and I think you'll find that the child really will appreciate it more and will start paying attention that you are, in fact, noticing good things that are happening. And the last thing on my list is to use positive touch. There's nothing like giving praise and giving a little high five or a pat on the shoulder to just put a big exclamation point behind that praise. When you touch the child, when you engage them in a positive way, that touch is kind of a major emphasis that this really was a good thing that you've done and I really appreciate it. When you engage in the praise in a very specific, enthusiastic, when you put an exclamation point of a positive touch, I think it really hits home for them. So what's happening here in these praise events? Well, a couple things are going to happen. One is the more you praise, the more you're going to become aware of and notice more some of the good things that your child's been doing that you haven't really paid much attention. You've been so wrapped up in the negative, and I'm not, and for a second, denying there may be some major negatives, but you've sort of neglected the positive things they've done. You need to bring the deposits in. You got to rebalance the bank account by putting more in, and one of the ways to do that is in noticing the things they do in a positive way. What's going to happen to the child when you start noticing positive things? Well, you know, sometimes just by you noticing it, they start engaging in more positives. And so their behavior may actually improve. Now, I don't actually believe that this will be enough to fix your child's problems, but it certainly will help if you start noticing good things and they start being encouraged by that. Most importantly, as you praise the child, they will begin to have a more positive attitude about you as the parent. We can only make our children do what they need to do only to some extent. It's only when they want to please us, when they care about their relationship with us, can we really make a difference in the child's life. And that's really what I wanted to communicate today. We want to encourage the want to in children. We want them to do better and therefore if we have a good relationship with them, they're going to want it as well. Well, thank you for your attention. I look forward to our next series, which we'll be discussing how to use contracting, a very important skill that I think you will find helpful. Thank you now.